It's also good, nice and breezy for this unbelievably hot weather. Thank you so much for the introduction. It's so fabulous to be here if you're a Conduit member. If you're a Trouble member, it's so brilliant to be welcoming Salma El-Wardany to the stage this evening and to talk about her incredible book, These Impossible Things, which I just finished reading, kind of in tears, in love, just so enjoying spending time with these absolutely amazing characters and all of the uncomfortable conversations that get talked about and get brought to the surface, and it's just been such a brilliant experience. So thank you so much for writing it and for writing such a brilliant book. To kind of get started, tell us a little bit about the background, tell us about where this book came from.
This book, hello, good evening, hi, hello.
Oh, and to everyone watching online, hello.
Hello. Do you know what?
Hello.
I know we're all doing these hybrid events now where we meld, online, and I always forget about the online people. I'm so sorry. I love you. Thank you for being here.
And please ask questions. Pop them in the comment section so we can get them.
Absolutely. I will not forget about that. It's lovely to be here with you all. So thank you so much for taking the time out of very busy lives to be here. It's genuinely gorgeous. Diving straight in the book, where did the idea come from? The background to the book is very much the same as the background to all of my work, which is rage. And
something us women are so unfamiliar with.
Yeah, I just feel it once or twice. And that's where a lot of my book a lot of my writing comes from, is when I'm angry at something that I can't find, that I want to find, that isn't there. I'm angry at representations that have been badly done and that have been damaging and that are dangerous. And so I kind of exist in this fury constantly. And that's where this book came from. I thought I better take all of that anger and that rage and put it somewhere, which is why I put it into this book. And there was two things that I was predominantly angry about, and that was not seeing a representation of female friendships on the page, and living in a society in which female friendships are the stopgap before you get married, and then somehow they're less important because now you're married and this man has given you everything, which, as we know, is unrealistic. And I remember, especially as I got older, I remember the female friendships in my life being the most important thing in my life. And regardless of the men who had come and gone, that those women that prevailed, that were there by my side through every relationship and bad breakup and heartbreak and family situation, and they had just been there throughout it all. And I think there's such value in that. And yet we don't talk about it in our society. They're not valued at all. And so I thought, well, I'll put that on the page. And then also, I have not seen myself on the pages of literature all of my life growing up. And I was a real bookworm. Like, I read the books. And just never found myself. And then I did my degree in literature, and then I did a master's in literature. And for my master's thesis, I decided to look at the representation of Muslims within Western literature, right? So the UK, the US, Australia, New Zealand. I looked. For a whole year, I read books from across these geographical locations. And you make that face because you already know it's bad. And the conclusion was pretty damning, and it was unfailingly across these locations, across these countries, Muslim women only ever fit into 3 categories. And that was, 1, the terrorist. We've all heard about that category. Number 2 was the Orientalist. So think Aladdin, Jasmine. I live in the desert. I'm the 6th wife of a sultan, and I have 40 camels. And then the third one was the Western Muslim woman who has been emancipated from the shackles of an oppressive religion, and the West has saved her. Which, understandably, I did not identify with any of them. And I remember thinking, well, that's not me and my girlfriends. We all went out and got drunk and had sex and went to mosque and definitely embedded ourselves in our cultures and our faith and loved it and loved all the sides of us. And it enriched us and gave us these really rich texture to our lives, and didn't want to give any sides of it up. We didn't want to give up mosque. We didn't want to give up the sex. We weren't giving ground anywhere. And just that being the majority of people that I knew, and yet we didn't exist anywhere in literature. And Muslim women are not a tiny portion of society. We make up this massive chunk of society. And so there's that quote about, if you want to read a book that that's not out there, then you'd better write it yourself. So then I just thought I would write it.
And I think that the depictions of the three women who center in this book are so real, and they're so unbelievably complicated and complex, which is just incredible. And as you say, you know, that we have a real understanding, and we can totally understand when there are Christians who interpret their religion in the way that's comfortable for them and in the way that, you know, gives them freedom in a way they want to. But we have a very difficult time doing the same thing with Muslim women, and I think you really kind of break those boundaries in this book, which is incredible. Tell us about the three women who are at the heart of this story.
Three women. I think that's really nice of you to say, because I don't know that we're good at it in any religion, by the way. I think we're really pretty poor at it. And I talk about Muslim women, but you can apply that to Catholicism, Judaism, Sikhism. You can apply it to all of it. We're not good at talking about religion and faith and desire and all the things that come with it. We just immediately go, oh my God, you're Catholic, you can't have sex before you're married. Insert any religion, right? All the religions, and there's no sex. So the three women in the book are Malek, Kees, and Jenna. Kees is short for Bill Kees. They all come from three very different backgrounds. They're three very different women. Malek is Egyptian. Jenna is half Palestinian, half British. And Bill Kees is Pakistani. They've all been born and raised in this country, and they're all juggling very different ambitions. They've all got big ambitions. You know, Kees is adamant to change the world, and she's going to make it a better place. And she's going to become a lawyer, and she's got all these grand ambitions for how the world will change from the courtroom to legislation. She's going to make it better. And then you've got Jenna, who's this remarkably passionate, sensual woman who just wants the good things in life, who just wants luxury and soft things and pleasure. And she's hugely intelligent, training to become a doctor. She is also a phenomenal actress, and torn a little bit between the two paths that she perhaps should or should not be taking. And then you have Malek, who's Egyptian and a little bit of a dreamer, and always looking for something and searching to belong somewhere, and always looking for an adventure because she's not quite sure what she wants. And these three women have been friends since they were kids. They've picked each other up off the bathroom floor when they've been crying. They've gotten each other through family heartbreaks and friendship heartbreaks and love heartbreaks, and they've kind of been by each other's side. They're very much one another's anchor.
And you could really tell there's such a deep friendship there, and you sense it from the very beginning. In fact, you sense it in the first kind of pages of the book. How did you manage that, to kind of convey such friendship in such a quick amount of time?
I think I made a sex joke
you
on
did,
the first
really
page.
Quickly.
That seems like a good measure of friendship, if you can sit around with your mates and ask quite intimate questions about sex and no one kind of be shocked and horrified. I always find that's a very good, I can be open with you, I can be myself. I mean, as you can tell, I make sex jokes all the time, so, I mean, I don't wait until get to know people, but that, for me, was one of the ways to set that up. And also, I do think, and maybe this is because I'm a northerner, so I was raised in Newcastle, my family is still in Newcastle, and we take the piss out of each other a lot, and also I think it's an Irish thing as well. But it's a true measure of your friendship when you can take the piss out of one another and no one is going to cry or get upset about it. And the book very much starts from the very first page. It starts on a very teasing note. You know, Kees is ribbing Jenna about something and kind of being annoyed and frustrated and taking the piss out of her, which is my go-to friendship mode, clearly.
And when we meet these women, they are at a very interesting time in their lives. They are about to graduate from university. Why did you pick that moment to be the time when this book was going to be set?
Yeah, I ummed and ahed over this for a really long time, but I wanted it to be set when they're leaving university, because for those of us who went to university, and I think I mean, I'm speaking for myself here, but I certainly felt this, university is a bubble, and it's not real life. And you think it is when you're in it. And you're like, oh, I'm an adult. I pay a bill, like your phone bill or something. And you think you're doing it, like you think you're living adulthood. And then you leave university and you're like slapped around the face with rent and bills and everything else. And there's no student loan and there's no very understanding bureaucracy that you didn't pay your rent from your student loan in time. You know, none of that exists, and you're suddenly very much in the world. And I also think it's a really pivotal point where you make big decisions about where the next few years of your life is going to go. So you're confronted with very big decisions. You're in this bubble and you've suddenly been thrust into real life, which forces you to confront those big decisions. And it's also kind of the bridge where for some people they're still at home. Some people still live at home through university. Some people move out. And for these women, some of them are at home and some of them had moved out for university. And I wanted that still to be there because I was very adamant that this first story that I was going to write about Muslim women, I wanted there still to be the complexities of home life. You know, my 20-year-old life when I was living at home is very different to my 30s when I'm not living at home and I'm very far away from my family. Like, the existence is completely different, and the way culture pulls on you and the way your family can pull on you is very different. And so I wanted them still to have a lot of the family complexities and to show that family dynamic. So I didn't want to set them too far ahead.
And the complexities come through, obviously, so vividly throughout the book. They talk quite early on about almost having two kinds of identities. One identity when they're with their friends, when they're in their relationships, and one identity as they walk through the door. There's like a great moment you say, kind of trying to brush off all the sins before they walk through the front door. Tell us about writing about that.
I think I just wanted to show something in which those two worlds go side by side along with each other. And whilst they are difficult to navigate, and whilst they are hard to juggle, they still exist. They still run side by side. And I think we've all felt this, regardless of culture. And I think it's a really prime thing with family. So when you go home to your family home, often you can revert to quite teenage tendencies, or you fall into patterns of behavior with your family that have been there since you were a kid, and you fall into those dynamics, right? And then you kind of go back to your life in the city or something, and then you're free from all of that, and that's not you anymore. And I have always struggled with that. I always find that really difficult and interesting, the way we move between those worlds, and I think we all do it. And so I wanted to show these women moving between the worlds and how much they loved those worlds, right? Because I go home and I love my family. They drive me fucking mental, but I love my family. But it's difficult. It is hard when you're growing in different directions, or you want something different from your life than your family perhaps wanted, or your community, or the people in your extended family wanted for you, you know? If I was to go and see all the aunties that I used to see in the mosque when I was a kid, they would look at me and go, "And why aren't you married? And where's the children?" And you have affection and love for these people, but you also want something different from your life, and it's just this incredibly difficult period. And I wanted that to be in the book. I wanted to show that they love where they go home to, and they get a lot from it, but also they're growing in different directions, and they want different things than perhaps their community want from them or for them. And so it was really important to put that in, because I just think we all struggle with it, to be honest.
We do, and I think it would be so easy to kind of say, there are very strict rules in certain communities, and I'm very lucky that I'm not in a community like that, but there are always going to be things in the family that your family disapprove of, whether it's not going to university, coming out to your family if you're homosexual, a whole bunch of things where you're going to be the first one in your family to do something, and you're going to be breaking the norm, and that's relatable to everybody reading this book.
100%. We're all, and it sounds terrible, but we're all letting down our family members in one way or another. And maybe not to these...
Part of growing up, really.
Right. Yeah. And maybe not to these huge, these huge catastrophes, but in some way or another, there's little disappointments littered around every family. And maybe even in the other way, like I have disappointments on my parents. I wished more for them in other ways, and I think we all have them, what we wanted for each other, or what we all see ourselves differently to how other people see us. And we can look at people in our family and think, and I've been guilty of doing this with some of my cousins, who got married very young. Like, they did university, they got married, they had the kids. Now there's like 7 kids. I don't know how many nieces and nephews, but there's some. And and I look at them and I love them all and they're wonderful. I have to put that caveat in. But I look at them and think, I wanted more for you. Or I wanted something else for you. You could have been brilliant at this. I know you loved doing this before you got married and became a mum and got weighed down with all of the things that motherhood brings, because it brings so much. So I think all those little disappointments are littered every which way in a family. So a little bit, I wanted to put a little bit of that in.
Absolutely. But aside from that, while that's definitely in there, you also get this really warm sense from the different homes that these girls go back to. Every single family is different, but is so incredibly warm. You can just tell that it smells amazing, the food's amazing, and it's a really comforting, safe place that they all come back to. And it was so lovely to kind of be in those environments and feel that kind of family vibe. And then you can tell why, if these women are dating men that they're not supposed to because they're not Muslim, you can tell why this is such a battle, because they're clearly so in love with their families and with their homes.
Right, and that's exactly, you've hit the nail on the head. That's exactly what I wanted to put out in the book, because we have this idea in our society, I think, where we say everything's worth it for love, all in the name of love. And if you meet someone, you give it up for love, and love conquers all and it prevails. It does not. I think that's a lot of bullshit, personally. Which is not to say I'm cold and dead inside and not romantic. I have romantic inclinations every now and then. But I just wanted a portrayal. And this, again, subverts, I think, the narrative that's been told about Muslim women as well. I wanted to offer a narrative in which the question was posed, are you worth it? Are you worth giving up my family that I love, that has made me who I am, that I get a lot from? Are you worth giving it up for? Will you be enough for me when it's just me and you? And even if my family accept you and like you, because you're very different to me and we don't come from the same culture, which means our marriage traditions are different and our bachelorette traditions are different, I won't have all of that with you, right? It's not going to be the same, like in Pakistani communities, you will get the groom's family will come over and give gifts and sweets, and it's gorgeous traditions, right, that we have. But if you're going to marry a white guy, it's not going to be the same. They're not going to follow the same traditions that you grew up knowing that when it was your turn, this would be here for you, and you're giving up a lot. And so I just wanted to pose the question. I didn't want to be all, love's the answer, fuck them. I wanted to be very, I don't know if you're worth it.
And that exact question is what has part this friendship group. And it's the bottom, it's the question, and it's what each of them decides to kind of go on a different path when it comes to deciding who they're going to love, whether family comes first, whether career comes first. And they're at that pivotal stage, and it comes to a boiling point, and they realize that there's an argument, and the three friends go off in different directions, which is tragic. And so early on in the book, it's painful to watch.
Yeah, it is. I love writing sad scenes as well.
Oh, thank you. It really hurts.
Every time someone's told me they've cried in the book, I'm like, really, tell me more. It is genuinely the only time I'm happy to make anyone cry. Other than that, I don't want to. But yeah, for me, this book is a love letter to female friendship. And it was really important then, quite early on, I wanted to set them all adrift from one another, because I wanted to show what happens when the women in your life suddenly disappear, and how it can make you a different woman, and that the choices you make are very different when you make them alone and you don't have your girlfriends that you trust implicitly by your side to run things through, or to get second opinions on, or to guide you through some of the really tricky things in life. I wanted to show that when women aren't there, life becomes so much more difficult than it already is. Just as a starter, being a woman is already hard. But then without a circle of women around you, how difficult that becomes.
Absolutely, and you can feel the loneliness come from some of the characters at different stages in the book. The men in their lives are not enough, no matter who they are, no matter what they're doing, it's not enough. They're lonely, and they're struggling without their female support system, and you can so tell it comes through so brilliantly. And they all actually also have very different ideas about sex, and you get right into the sex and don't shy away from it. They have different ideas about sex. You pull out sex in incredibly pleasurable ways. You talk about virginity as being a very interesting topic when it comes to relationships, whether you're in a relationship with a Muslim man or a non-Muslim man, how that affects sex and virginity, and that's an incredible theme in the book. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, there's a line in the book that I think probably sums up where the characters are at with it. There's a line that Jenna says, and they're talking about Jenna's virginity. What's the spoiler situation in here? Can I give spoilers? I'm
giving away until about like a third of the book, and then I'm going to stop talking about what happens, or at least not specifically.
Okay. Yeah. Third. Okay. So we're talking about.
I'll tell you what page that is.
Yeah. Jenna's talking about her virginity, and Jenna's a really passionate, sensual woman, like I said, right? She loves pleasure, and she's going to get her pleasure. She's going to get her pleasure up to a certain point, right? Because she would like to maintain her virginity, and her friends who have not maintained this stance are arguing with her and telling her basically just to give it up. There's a line that Jenna says, yes, God is forgiving, but Arab men aren't, which pretty much sums up, I guess, her attitude on sex and what she wants to do. And for me, so the sex and the conversations that they have around sex was really important. And I was really intentional about it from the very beginning, before I'd even put pen to paper for this book. I was adamant that this was going to be a book in which women had big desires and they enjoyed pleasure, and they were never going to feel shame about it, ever. That's what I wanted to do with this book. I wanted women, and then women of faith, women who believed in a religion and practiced that religion, to enjoy sex without shame. Because in our society, and regardless of religion and culture, when we talk about women having sex and we talk about female pleasure, we talk about it hand in hand with shame. And I wanted to detangle that, and I wanted to offer another alternative. And when people step outside the bounds of their religion and they do have sex before marriage, the conversation that happens next is, do you feel guilty? Oh my God, did you pray afterwards? How do you feel?
Do you wear white on your wedding day?
Do you wear white on your wedding day? You know, like, do you think God will forgive you? We have all these ridiculous conversations about sex. And like I said, when we talk about religion as well, people immediately will go to what you're not allowed to do, as opposed to what your religion gives you, right? And so I really wanted these women to be desirous and to enjoy their sex. And whilst they have different questions about it, and whilst they go about it different ways, and some people will lose their virginity and some people won't, they all never feel shame about it. The things that they are doing are informed, their choices are informed by the patriarchy around them, as opposed to, God's going to hate me if I engage in this pleasurable act. So that was, from the very get-go, these were going to be women who got theirs and felt good about it.
And that kind of sexual instinct is so brilliantly there. They know how to pleasure themselves, and they're not apologetic about it, as you say, which is really brilliant. And so let's talk a little bit about some of the male characters in the book, because there is a huge variety of male characters in the book, from very interesting father figures to male friends. And then you've got the white males who are providing the difficulty to, you know, several of the ladies, you know, throughout the book, because they're, you know, and it's so interesting the way they say, yes, you know, I love you, I'm in love with you, but this actually isn't about you. And I think that you do that so well by kind of putting the men in their place, not showing them to be horrible, but just showing them to be kind of really, really struggling to understand what the women they're dating are going through.
Do you know what? On the first draft of this book, I sent it to my editors, and their first, like, one of the big criticisms that, or the structural things that I had to change, they said, Salma, the men are a little one-dimensional. And I said...
Men are one-dimensional.
Well, I said, well, men have been writing women in literature for decades, and they've been writing women as one-dimensional, so I don't know why I have to do anything about it now, the other way around. And then I vented for a really long time, and then my editors talked me down off this cliff edge that I was sitting on. I was prepared to die on this hill. I was like, I don't fucking owe them anything. I don't owe the men anything. I did come down from the hill a little bit, and I worked on the men a little bit and made them less one-dimensional. But what I will say about the men in this book is they are logistical tools, right? So they're a bit like Ubers. They get you from A to B, and they help get the women sometimes from A to B, but that's it. They're not, you know, they're a bit, in my opinion, they're a bit wet. Apart from Keith's dad, who is not, and he's not one-dimensional, so he's lovely. But the other men, I think they're a bit wet. Someone said this to me. Someone was like, oh, but these guys are all so great and these guys aren't. And I was like, they're all shit. But so I did work on the guys a bit, because I was fundamentally quite uninterested in their stories. But of course, they do present problems for the women, and they do present conflict for the women, because they have to suddenly make a decision about these men that they're in love with. Are they going to, and kind of finishing university is one of those pivotal points. Are we going to go move to this big city and live together and continue this? Or shall we, now seems like a good break. Now seems like a time to end this. You know, so they present very big conflicts to the women. And, you know, we're not allowed to give spoilers, so I can't say what happens. I was quite adamant that at the end, as many men would be written off as possible.
They all die. They go off a cliff. One big car accident.
And they're gone. End scene. So that's kind of, I was quite adamant that, and I'm very intentionally staying away from it. Oh, and they all lived happily ever after, because they ended up with each other, because that's not happily ever after.
Oh, I
right?
really wanted two of them too, but I'm not gonna say much to it. But I really did. But it's okay.
Tell me afterwards.
I will, yeah.
So I was very mindful about that these men, they're here, they present a conflict, they are quite logistical, but ultimately, I do think this is a book with a happy ending. People may differ. I think it has a happy ending. But I think the women are each other's happy endings. And I think the women are the ones that make it the happy ending, as opposed to everyone's going to end up down an aisle.
That's totally true. And the men they show really different kind of insights into the kind of men that we all date at some stage in our lives. And I think that that's really important. They're all very relatable. We can all see a problem and think, how did I react to that? One of the very deep things that we get into, and again, without spoiling too much, but there is abuse. There is abuse in several of the relationships. And it's really interesting to see how the characters deal with this, how they justify it, the different stages of blaming themselves, blaming their actions, blaming their behavior, blaming what they've been wearing. And I think that's just so well written, and the need for the friendship to come back to kind of put these women back on track.
Yeah, and with that, actually, just that point about, the abuse that happens in the book, and what I wanted to do is these women, there's conflict that comes into their lives, a lot of these conflict comes from these men, but they exist in the grey, right? Because I think we're quite used as a society saying, he hit her, that's abuse. And we all know it, and we can all recognize it, and we would all call it the same thing, and no one would argue about it. Everyone would go, yes, that's it. And he raped her, so that's rape. Good, clean. We all know that's how that works. We know what that looks like. But then there's this insidious grey area that I think the majority of women live in. And it's the grey area of male violence, where it doesn't look like the things that we've been told abuse is. And so you have questions around it and you say, wait, was that? I don't know, no, I'm sure that wasn't. Or that looked like that could have, no, I'm sure he wasn't. No, he's not there. And that's, later on in the book, that's what these women get into. They get into these grey areas where you're not sure if that's a toxic thing that guy has just done. And maybe if you look at it a certain way, you can say it's because he's really protective and he just cares about you so much and he just doesn't want you to be in any danger or unsafe. And so he's done X, Y, and Z, and we find ways to justify it. And I think that's the difficult part, one of the biggest kind of hardships when it comes to womanhood is navigating that space and not knowing what to call things, and sometimes not knowing, can I just say outright this is abuse or this is rape or this is assault? And I think we live in those areas all the time. So I wanted some of the bad things that happen to these women to be in that space, because I think it's a space that a lot of women can relate to, and we can, at one point in our lives we've said we've known that behavior, or we've experienced that, or we've experienced something like this, or we know a friend who went through that, or, and that's kind of what I wanted to highlight, and just how difficult it is to navigate it. And then actually when you're going through those grey spaces and your best girlfriends aren't there by your side and you're suddenly without them, who do you talk to about those grey spaces? And how those grey spaces then become magnified and become even worse when you're isolated in them and you don't have someone to say. And I mean, I'm sure you've all experienced this, the women in the room, and I certainly have, when you're talking about someone that you're dating or something, and you say something and it hasn't really clicked with you, and then your girlfriend goes, that's not okay. Or that's really bad that he did that. Like, that's not cool. Or that's not good behavior. Or you should talk to him about that because that's not okay. I've had that. I've needed the women in my life by my side to tell me sometimes. And then I go, oh, yeah, actually, you're right. Because we live in a society that has taught women that romance is toxic behavior. We've been socialized to believe that toxic traits are romantic. So when a guy is like uber possessive of you, it's because he loves you. Or when he's,
getting into fights with other men, jousting over you and killing people.
Well, exactly,
to say,
right? He got into a punch-up
romantic
in the club because this guy came and asked for my number, and so they ended up in this big fight, and it's just because he's so protective of me and he just loves me so much. He's a piece of shit, actually, is what we should have been saying, right? And so we've been socialized to believe all this stuff, and when a guy is jealous and he's really jealous when I talk to my male friend, and it's because he's just he's so into me. No, I think he needs to go to therapy to work that out. And so all of those grey areas and those difficult parts of womanhood, I just kind of wanted to show how isolating it is when you don't have someone to talk to about it and how difficult it is.
And that so totally comes through, and it's so painful actually watching these women go through these various different struggles and the abuse that they experience from many different angles, and how that manifests and how they really struggle without that female connection. But on a slightly cheerier topic, we go to Egypt. I won't explain how, but there's a lot of the book is set in Cairo, and I know that you obviously spent a lot of time in Cairo pre and during the Arab Spring. Tell us about that. Tell us about including kind of the incredible parts of Cairo and also dealing with the political unrest there in the book.
Well, when I was in the revolution, do you know, I moved to Egypt, and I worked on a horse ranch for a while because I'd just done 4 years of university. And I thought, well, I want to do something different and not be at a desk for once. And I was studious. I went to the library a lot. And so I thought, I'm going to go onto this horse ranch. I've always liked horse riding, having done it all of 2 times. And I thought, yes, I'm going to go to the desert and I'm going to work on this horse ranch. My mum had a friend who'd moved out and started a horse ranch in the desert. So she said, I'll give Sheridan a call and see if she needs help around the farm. Lo and behold, Sheridan did. And so I went and I moved to this farm and I looked after I was basically a farmer for 5 months, right? Got up at 4 o'clock, milked the cow, looked after the sheep, the goats, the horses, rode the horses, mucked out a lot of shit, and did that on and off, did that for 5 months. And then I thought, I've had enough now. It's a good life. I was healthier than I've ever been in my life, lost a stone, accidentally, ate from the land, drank basically from the cow, made cheese from the milk from the cow. I milked the cow twice a day, which is, when I think about it, is just wild. 0 qualifications to do any of this, by the way. And then I thought, I've had enough, so I'm ready to go to the city. And this was just outside Cairo, so it was between Cairo and Alexandria in the desert. And a few kind of horse injuries later and falling off a few horses, I thought, I'm ready now. I'm ready to not be in wellies and covered in shit every day. And so I moved to Cairo. And I moved to Cairo on the 24th of January, 2011. And I thought, I'm going to get a job in international business where they need English speakers, and I'll do a vague idea of what I was going to do. And then that was the Thursday. And then the Friday was the 25th of January, 2011, which was the day the Egyptian revolution started. And I had some friends at the time who were, British citizens or American citizens, and their parents called them and said, you need to get out of the country immediately. It's not safe. The British embassy was putting on a special flight to get Brits out of Cairo. It had all got very volatile very quickly. And so my mum called me and she said, get down to the street and go and fight for your country.
Love you too, Mum. Thanks. Yeah.
I was like, okay, right. And my mum lived in Egypt. My Irish mother, by the way, she lived in Egypt for 9 years, and that's where I was born. And then she came over. She was like, "You go and fight for your country." And I was like, okay. So I stayed, and I thought, yeah, okay. And I remember thinking at the time, they're going to write about this in the history books one day, and how amazing to be able to say that I was there, that I fought in a revolution and I was there on the streets. So I did a lot of protesting, a lot of political blogging at the time to try and kind of shine a light on various things that were happening in the revolution, the things that kind of the media wasn't reporting on over here. Got caught out by the army a lot and pretended I didn't speak a word of Arabic and just smiled and flashed my British passport around, and thought, well, this is one privilege I'm going to cash in on. Don't have that many. I'll take this one. Which probably did save my hide quite a few times, actually. I should have been safer in many of those situations. I was not. I was reckless and young and stupid. And so I did a lot of fighting in the revolution. And do you know what? It was really beautiful at the same time. I mean, it's a shit show looking back at it. But at the time, when you have been born in a country that you haven't had that much access to and you haven't had that much experience with because you're living and you're being raised by an Irish woman and a Pakistani stepfather in Newcastle upon Tyne, you have Cairo in your head as this faraway land that you want to be more involved in, and then to go and fight for your country is very, very compelling. And so I wanted to include that feeling in the book for Malak, who goes to Egypt, because Malak has this aimlessness about her because she's looking to belong to something, and I think we can all relate to that as humans. the only thing we want is to belong to someone or something or some group. We want to say we belong to someone in this life. And that's Malak. She really feels this sense of belonging. And whilst, there's not much about the revolution in the book, actually, because I didn't want to get down a political revolution story. But for Malak, the revolution serves as this anchor where suddenly, because if you feel like you don't belong to a country and you want to belong more, what's more of a belonging than saying, I fought for that country. I fought in a revolution for that country. It's pretty compelling reason to belong. And so for Malak, that's what it is. It's about her being able to claim Egypt as her own and being able to claim this identity that she's hankered after for so long and wanting it so badly, and kind of what that does to her sense of self.
And Malak also, in fact, they all do go through really, really great spiritual challenges, and they come to their religion at times when they need guidance, when they need a bit of stability, and as you say, an anchor. And I think you play with religion so well, and when they decide that it's time to kind of get more involved, and when it's time to kind of pull away, when they're searching for God in different environments, I think is really beautiful and done in such an interesting way.
Right, because I think I personally, and if you're of faith, maybe you felt this too, but for me, my religion is a one-on-one relationship with my higher being, my God, right? It's between A and B. This is an exclusive relationship, right? But like any relationship, it ebbs and flows. And I have had many a time where I have been angry and disgruntled and annoyed at God and annoyed that things haven't gone how I wanted them to, or when really sad things or bad things have happened, I've had crosswords. And there's been times where my heart's been full of it and overflowing with it. And I think like any relationship, it takes work. And that's why I wanted these, there's a line at the beginning of the book where Malak has done something and then she is praying a lot, looking for some answers. And she says, and where the fuck is he now? Like, where's God now? And here I am. I'm doing what you want. I'm doing what's expected of me. And where the fuck is he? And she's angry. And I wanted to include the very different myriad of feelings that we have when it comes, if you are someone of faith, when it comes to God or a higher being, or when you're questioning your place here on this universe or what it's all for. It's not this, oh, well, I'm this person and I believe, so it's a straight road to heaven. I find it a very complex relationship that takes work, that goes through many bouts of therapy.
Absolutely. You also approach money in the book. You approach class in actually a lot of different ways, which is really interesting, and how these different characters come from incredibly different backgrounds, and money is kind of an undertone to lots of these characters. Either they've come from a slightly poorer background, so they're working really hard now to try and overcome that. They've come from wealth, and so that they have a lot more privilege than some of the other characters. Tell us about including those kinds of elements and themes.
So I wanted to include that because I don't think we talk about class at all, and not very well, certainly, when we do have conversations. I mean, especially if you're a Brit, because we are all labouring under the assumption that it doesn't exist and that we live in a classless society, which is funny. And I'm always quite open about talking about class, but I find it still quite a taboo subject. And I especially found this when I moved to London and I would talk to people and there would be this like, oh, we don't talk about that, like, avoid that. And I would think, oh, why are we not talking about this? Because it obviously impacts everything. And I grew up working class. My family's working class, always have been. My dad's a market trader. I used to help out on the market stalls on the weekend and got all my clothes from Oxfam and had a lovely time of it. But I, even though we didn't have any money, the childhood was good. The living was good. My mum was smart with the money, and we managed to, spend a lot of time in nature, right? And I find that when you talk about that, there's this embarrassment from other people that they don't want to broach class as a subject, because when I say, oh, I got all my clothes from Oxfam and we didn't have meat all the time because we couldn't afford it, people are immediately awkward and think, oh, God.
Change the subject.
Yeah. And I'm like, I'm totally cool. Like, I had a good time. It was hard, but maybe you grew up with a lot of money and your childhood was worse than mine, right? That doesn't equate any kind of like tangible happiness. And so I find we're very bad at talking about it. And because I love saying the things that no one wants to say, obviously I always talk about it. And that's why I wanted to put it in the book as well. And I deeply resent a lot of books that don't address class. And I've read some books recently, which I will not be naming, that are very middle class, don't ever address that. And I find that, and that personally for me really annoys me.
You can name them if you want to. It's fine. We won't tell anyone.
I am going to plead the fifth. But I find it really annoying because I kind of just want them to acknowledge it, acknowledge that this thing has happened to your character and it's made your character get out of the predicament they were in because they had a lot of money. And that's fine, but let's just be really honest about what that is, right? That's your middle class character being able to live a very different life. And so I knew that I wanted to make it obvious that, you know, out of Jenna, Malak and Keith in the book, Jenna has money and she comes from money and her family has money because her father's a really renowned surgeon. But Malak and Keith are, you know, they're living in a council house growing up and they're all on top of each other and they always have been. And Keith's dad has holes in his jacket because he can't afford at that time because he's just paid for his daughter's wedding, as Keith's sister. And I just wanted to put that there, and especially with Keith and Harry, who she's with. Harry comes from money, right? His family come from money. You know, whilst Jenna's family is rich because her father's a surgeon, Harry's family is like an old money family in London, and Keith grew up in a council house, and the conflict that provides in their relationship, or not because anyone's fighting about money or anything like that, but because of her ideals and her principles and what she believes the world could be if we could all just share wealth a little bit better. And yet she's dating someone who kind of seems opposite and whose family is very much the opposite. And I wanted that to be a factor. I wanted to acknowledge that class impacts how we move through the world and what we are able to do. And I wanted to impact what our characters are able to do. Because I just think it's so blatantly obvious and it's there. Why don't we just say it?
Absolutely. We're going to come to questions from the audience in just a second. So if you're watching online, do put them. Yes, you.
Haven't forgotten about you.
Whichever camera you're coming from. Do put them in the comments and we'll make sure that they get read out. And in the audience, do start thinking of them as well. But while this is a topic that we go on about a lot at the moment, as we should, and we shouldn't stop talking about it, but there is a moment without spoiling too much where reproductive rights do come into the picture. And, you know, we have this kind of, we follow the journey of one of them as they kind of go through this really difficult period. And I'm really glad that you included that. And I think it's really important to continue including these things in books and show the realistic side of what happens.
I know, and that was before Roe v. Wade was even...
So wonderfully topical. Aren't you glad it just came out now?
Oh, Jesus. And you know what? The devastating thing, I was in the States promoting the book, and I was there the day the Supreme Court overturned it. And I was in New York, and it was honestly devastating, and you could feel it in the air in New York, and you could feel it from every woman that I spoke to that day, that there was just this collective grief in the air for what had just happened. And it was such a sad day, and it makes me want to cry just thinking about it because it was awful. And I was doing an event when I was in the States, and this event, typically whenever they do an event with an author, they ask the author to pick a charity that they would like some of the ticket sales to go to. And obviously I was like, well, this is perfect. We'll take Planned Parenthood, because it was just so pertinent to the time. And I remember quite a few people messaging me on Instagram being like, did you know they were going to overturn Roe v. Wade? Is this why you put it in the book? I was like, I wish I had known, and we could have done more about it. But yes, there is an abortion in the book. And again, I wanted to put in the things that we're not good at talking about. I wanted to put in the things that typically the Muslim community refuse to acknowledge and find it even more difficult to talk about it, despite the theology of Islam backing up and supporting abortion. Way better than America's doing it. For now, they were all worried about Sharia law. They should have been worrying about their own. What I wanted to do is I wanted to write a book that was this glorious example of female friendships, but also I wanted to write a book that confronts how difficult it is to be a woman, and how difficult it has always been to be a woman, and how that struggle continues, and that the experiences that women have, from abuse to abortion to walking down the street, how, just like I said, that insidious place that you live in is so difficult when you're a woman. And I wanted to and I remember my friend my friend read this book just before it was published, before it had come out, And she read it and she turned around to me and she said, you really put these women through it, didn't you? And I turned around to her and I said, yes, but haven't we all been through it? And she just said, yeah, we have. And I think that's what I wanted to include. I wanted to include the real lived experience of women. And I don't think you can write a book about the experience of women without including the abuse and the abortion and the reproductive rights and the insidious grey areas and the things that you have to deal with every single day. I don't think, otherwise I'd be writing fantasy, right? I'd be writing fantasy literature and that would be under fantasy. So I just wanted to include everything that we experience on a wide variety of things that women have experienced, and how, again, it's the women in your life that will get you through it. And it's generally the women who will take you to the abortion clinic or hold your hand whilst you have the baby or hold your hand while you go through something that's awful, because it's always a woman picking another woman up off the floor. So that's kind of what I wanted to include.
And you do so brilliantly, and I think that's a really good point for kind of me to end my questions on. And if there are any questions in the audience, this is the time. I know it's really hideous and scary going first. So for the absolutely, there we go. And we do have a microphone that's being run to you right now. So just wait 1 second so that everyone
people
at home
online can hear as well.
Because we wouldn't want them to miss your incredible question. Yes, go for it.
I don't know about incredible, but I haven't read your book. Hi, but I've loved listening to you.
It's great. They're on sale at the back.
What do you get out?
In the right place.
I'm interested to hear a little bit more about the topic of shame. And I want to hear about your experience. As women, we're socialized, in respect of your background, to feel shame about a lot of things. I'm particularly interested to hear about what you had to say about shame, divorcing shame from pleasure. As a religious woman, I'm a woman of faith myself. What has been your journey to distinguishing between being a woman of faith and having those principles and feeling proud of that, and disassociating from the shame that we've been socialized to feel, first as women, particularly as women of faith, from indulging in that pleasure? What has been your journey, and what was the point where you were able to distinguish between the two and say, I can inhabit the space of being a spiritual woman, and all that comes with that, and still be a woman and claim? What has been your journey, and how did you arrive at the thing of not feeling shame?
For me, I will caveat this by saying, because I never want to be dishonest about anything, that I have never, thankfully, thank God, thank all the higher beings, I've never had that much shame around it, and I then have to give credit to my mother for that. Not that my mum used to ask me the question all the time, do you not have any shame? Because I was always very free, as in, and I don't mean this, I would just get changed in front of my girlfriends or whatever, or like whip my top off or my trousers off, and then my mum would be like, do you not have shame? And I would think, no. But logic didn't. I am quite pragmatic about things. So logically I went, but we're all women in this room and we all have the same body parts, so why should there be shame around that, And my mum is definitely way more of a prude than me. My mum has never spoken about sex in her life, I don't think. Not to me. We had a very rushed conversation about the birds and the bees when I was a kid. And at my book launch in June, she came up to me at the end of the night and she said, and this is the closest my mum's ever got to talking about anything to do with sex. She came up to me and she said, never in my life have so many people thanked me for having sex. To which point I was like, this night is over. Good night. But what I will say is, when I give credit to my mum for this, is that she raised me to never care about what other people thought of me. And she raised me very much outside of the bounds of peer pressure and worrying about what everyone was going to say to you. And my mum is an Irish woman who converted to Islam, right? So she was already on the outskirts of the community already, right? Because she was this Irish white woman. So what would she know about Islam, and what would she know about it? So we were already always on the outskirts a little bit, I think, in a way that when you are all of the same faith and have been for generations in your family, you're not. So I always want to acknowledge that privilege. Any shame that I have felt has been from people around me telling me that I should be ashamed for what's going on or what I've been doing. But as always, I've always applied logic to it and thought, well, that doesn't make sense. If I have sex with someone that I'm madly in love with, and God is love, that doesn't make sense to me. Why would we all then be in the depths of shame about it, right? And I wrote, and there's an anthology came out quite a few years ago called It's Not About the Burqa, and it was an anthology of Muslim women writing about their experiences. And the editor came to me and said, can you write an essay about sex and Islam? Because obviously I'm very vocal about it, and I've always been vocal about it, much to my parents' dismay as well, because they probably have more shame than I do about it. I think my dad was like, I remember he watched my first TEDx talk that I did, and I spoke about losing my virginity in this talk to my white Yorkshire boyfriend at the time. And my dad was like, yeah, I watched you talk. It was good, yeah. I don't know why I have to talk about sex. So they would love it if I didn't talk about sex, and if I perhaps had a bit more shame, they would quite enjoy that, I think. But it's never made sense to me. And what I will say as well is I was home educated. I didn't go to school, and my mum taught me. And my mum is an ardent feminist and was raised on very feminist literature and a very feminist curriculum. And so when I often talk to my girlfriends who also grew up in Newcastle with me and were part of the same Muslim community, and we now all live in London, and we have different views on things and feel different levels of shame. And I will often ask them, well, why do I feel so good about this? Or why do I feel good about my body and you don't? And they always look at me and go, because you didn't go to school. Because you weren't in that peer pressure, in that system of I have to do this and I have to look like this and I have to do that. And there's peer pressure in school to lose your virginity and to not lose your virginity, right? And it kind of comes from everywhere. From the ages of about 6 to 16, I was not in education. I was not in school, right? I was being educated, but I wasn't going to a classroom every day where people look at what you're wearing and whether you've developed boobs or not, or whether you've started your period, or whether you've kissed a boy yet, or whether you've had sex yet. All of those milestones that you're apparently meant to hit at certain times, I was completely devoid from, I was like climbing a tree happily, like a little scruff. And I think that has a massive part to play in my lack of shame that I have felt. And then I remember getting into a relationship in which I did everything that the community and the Muslim community wanted me to do. And I played by the rules. And it was awful. And the relationship was abusive and terrible. And I had this one moment where I remember in the heart of this abuse, and it had got really bad, and I was crying on the floor, and they had been violent, and I remember thinking, and where the fuck are they now? Where's the Muslim community now? I did everything they wanted me to, and I played by the rules, and I've done the non-shameful thing. And where are you now? And it just made me realize that you can do everything the way they want you to, and they will not love you more for it. So I can be a picture of, piety, and I can be chaste, and I can not be vocal about masturbating online and having sex and pleasure, and I can do all of that. They're not going to love me more for it. And so then, pragmatically, again, I just figured, well, I better just talk about sex, and I better just talk about all the pleasure that I get. And I think it's really fundamental to women's experiences. I don't know if anyone saw the film recently about Leo Grande. Did anyone see it? With Emma Thompson in it. Good luck to you, Leo Grande. And it's all about, and Emma Thompson plays this teacher, and she goes and hires a sex worker because she's never had pleasurable sex. She's had missionary with her husband for 70 years or whatever, and not 70, I think 40 years. And she wants to try new things, right? And at the end of the film, sorry if you're going to watch this, and at the end of the film, she says, I have become a new woman because I've accessed pleasure. And that really resonated with me, because I think exactly the same. I think when you can access pleasure, when you are able to say what you want in the bedroom, when you are able to say, no, I like it like this, or can we do this, or when you can have conversation, when you can claim your pleasure and you can ask for it, I think it's so powerful, and the confidence that it gives you to move through the world. I mean, all these white men have been out here getting theirs and getting pleasure for eons, and that's no wonder they're so confident, And I'm just kind of like, I think it's fundamental to women. And so I desperately want all the women to have all the orgasms and all the pleasure. And I think if I keep talking about it, then it will hopefully give someone else permission to talk about it and give someone else courage to talk about it. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we'll go straight backwards. Yes, if you just pass the microphone behind you.
Just wondering.
You're saying you want to promote people to talk about it, but what's been the response? Is it quite varied, or generally do people put their hands up, or?
Do you know what? When I wrote this essay, and it's not about the burqa, about sex, I overwhelmingly had so many Catholic women who wanted to talk to me about it because it's the same regardless of faith, right? You can call your religion whatever, but religious communities do not do sex well. And so many Catholic women had responded and kind of been overwhelmingly grateful that we were talking about it and that we were talking about how shame shouldn't be part of sex. And the same with the novel, you know, lots of people have reached out to me. You know, someone reached out to me yesterday, actually, whose family are Jewish, you know, and she said it's exactly the same. And I feel like it's giving me the courage to talk about things a little bit more. So it's been good. That's not to say there's not Muslims out there who hate it. There was. Someone completely slagged it off online and said, I don't know why we can't have... I think it's outrageous that women are having sex and then going to pray, and that it's offensive to Islam that I had written this about it. Yeah, I had sex and then I prayed, so...
Part of me kind of wonders whether it's just good to enjoy it and keep it behind closed doors, right? And not talk about it.
And not talk about it.
Well, maybe a mix of both, but talk about it with your friends or close friends rather than post it all over online and just enjoy it with your partner or what have you.
My granny would agree with you.
Good old-fashioned way. Well, maybe I'm granny's.
No, my granny was...
Old school.
Irish granny, was raised in Ireland in the 40s, right? No one was talking about sex. And I've had a difficult relationship with my granny since I started talking about sex online, right? And it has... me and my granny used to be really close. She hates what I'm doing online. She hates it. Doesn't agree with it at all. And we had some really difficult years, and probably still are in quite difficult years, because she just can't fathom. She's exactly the same. Just do it quietly and don't talk about it.
Or just with your close friends.
Or just with your close friends, right? I think for my granny, it's just a no conversation starter ever. And we once had this conversation, and I said to her, Granny, when you got married, you know, back in the day, do you not wish someone had talked to you about it? Do you not wish someone had a conversation about sex with you? And she said, yes, I suppose I would have liked that. And we never said anything else about it. And I never pushed again. And I felt less angry at her when she said that to me. And lots of people will take your view, yeah? You just talk about it with your friends and do it quietly. But what I will say to that is, A, not everyone's friends are comfortable to talk about it. I have learned lots about sex from my girlfriends, right? Sure. When I started having sex, I'd be like, oh my God, this happened and it felt a bit odd. Is that okay? Is that normal? Should I have? What's that? And I thank God for them every day for teaching me what I needed to. But no, I think when we don't talk about it and we keep it behind closed doors and with our partners and with our friends only, I think what all we're doing is perpetuating a patriarchal tool that is used to control women. Because the truth is, we can talk about it as sex, right? And me and you getting pleasure, but actually talking or not talking about sex is a way that men have controlled women. That's why we call them whores. That's why we call them sluts. That's why we say you're ruined because you've had sex. So we use words like ruined, and that's a tool to control women. And anything that is designed to control women, I am fully invested in dismantling. And not talking about sex and pleasure and denying women pleasure and saying that you shouldn't get pleasure. And if you do get pleasure, then you're a whore, is a patriarchal tool. And I will do everything in my power to dismantle that and to burn that to the ground. So I think we should all be on the rooftop screaming about our sex, basically. You know what? I know you're totally grossed out by that, and that's fine. When we get to a stage where men don't control our bodies, then let's consider keeping it behind closed doors. But until then, I'm afraid I'm going to have to scream about it.
Yeah, I completely agree. In other ways, you're completely reliant. And, you know, this is an incredible book about female friendship, but there are times in your lives where you've just moved, you've changed jobs, you lose friends, you don't see them for a certain period of time. And if you're completely reliant on them as being the only place you get your sexual information from, or questioning, is this normal, is that not normal, that's the only place it can leave you really, really isolated. And it's, you know, it's kind of like salaries. If we don't talk about it, then we give the power to somebody else, fundamentally. But
salaries and sex.
Salaries and sex.
Everyone
Talk
pass
about
the mic around.
Absolutely. I think there's a
life will never be dull.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll come forward, and unless you have a question.
Yeah, I had a question.
And then we'll, I suppose, go logical route. We'll
Hi,
find it.
So just to give you a bit of background, I'm Arab myself and also Scottish, so I've kind of grown up with a lot of what you're saying. And this might be a little bit of a thought download, but just bear with me.
Let's go.
We're ready.
I guess I would love to hear about any tips or any revelations that you've had in that kind of cultural identity crisis is probably what I would call it, which I personally feel like I've had almost my entire life. So maybe never feeling quite Western. I mean, I'm born and raised in Scotland, right? But never ever being Western enough because I don't drink alcohol, but never quite being Muslim or Arab enough because actually, I do live a life of, it's that, as you'll probably understand, that kind of halal haram ratio, as they like to say it, but what's forbidden, what's allowed, and almost being in an impossible dating situation because you kind of, the Arab men are one way inclined, but then the Western men are another way. And this may not make much sense to a lot of people in the room, but you mentioned that line in the book, which was God is forgiving, but Arab men aren't. And that really resonated with me because I think, and it is because it's internalized patriarchy, but very much part of the identity crisis is I want to be the perfect woman for the man of my dreams one day, but then equally, it's just a constant battle. So sort of how you've navigated that would be amazing.
I understand everything that you're saying, and I will hug you later.
Yeah, I have tears as I'm trying to hold back tears.
I can feel it, and I can absolutely feel it, and I really relate to it. Tip number one, revelation number one, avoid Arab men, okay? Someone's going to make a headline out of that, aren't they?
We weren't. It's cool.
It's a revelation I had, okay? And I really understand, right? I was born in Egypt, and then I was brought to Newcastle. My mother's Irish. My dad, obviously, my biological dad was Egyptian. And then my mum remarried when I was about 5, a Pakistani man who's been the only father I've ever had, right? And I always say it takes more than genetics to be a father, and he has been mine. And I've been raised Pakistani, right, with all my Pakistani family, and then the Egyptian side and the Irish side, and then in Newcastle upon Tyne as a Geordie as well. So 100%, I feel you so deeply of always having a foot in a very different world and never belonging to any of them, right? When I go see my Irish family in Dublin, they just cannot understand why I'm not having a pint of Guinness, because I also don't drink, right? Lots of my Muslim friends do, but I never have, right? It's just never appealed to me. I had conversations with my therapist later. It's because I like control too much, but that's a different story. So I've never drank either. My Irish family can't understand why I'm not getting on the Guinness. My Egyptian family call me Agnabeya when I go back home to Egypt, which means foreigner. And then the Pakistani family don't even think I'm one of them. The Geordies ask me where I'm from. No one will claim you. And this is something that I learned the hard way. No one will claim you. And I also learned, I did another TEDx talk about this, and it's all about it's called Where Are You From? And it kind of is confronting that question that I know you've been asked your whole life, right? And what I realized, and I realized this later on in life, is I had been looking to belong to the cultures that I wanted to be a part of through the men that I dated, right? And we all we try to access culture and belonging through people, whether that's the people, and you will have heard it in any conversations when, I don't know if there's any guys who are with a woman of colour, they'll be like, well, I'm with a woman of colour, so I know this and I know that, and I belong to this world. But we all do it, ultimately, right? We all try to access belonging through the people opposite us, or the people around us, or the people that we surround ourselves with, right? And I realised going through that I had always been doing it. When I was young and I was living in Newcastle, and we were one of the only people of colour or brown families around, right? It's not like London, right? You didn't see people of colour that often. My existence was just by proxy whiter, and I was with a white man when I was in university, and it was fine and it was great, and because that was the culture I was trying to belong to at the time. And then I moved to Egypt, and I was with an Egyptian man, right? And I was trying to very much embody that Egyptian world, and very much trying to be that Arab person that I knew I was, and that had been grown up to believe that I was, but I've never been able to access in Newcastle upon Tyne. And then, and then I remember that all going up in flames, and moving to London eventually, and I was at a time where I was just quite angry at everyone, and I was very actively involved in a lot of activism and trying to create better spaces for people of colour, and I was very engaged in that world, and most of my friends at the time were kind of West African or from North Africa as well, and we were all very intent on working towards that, and I fell in love with a black man at the time, because that was a world that I was inhabiting and trying to access, right? And I think that went up in flames too. And we never talk about how we try to access belonging through people, because we think it doesn't make us sound good, or it doesn't put us in a good light. But ultimately, if you think about it, we've all done it. And we all have privileges of being in certain worlds because we're with someone from that world. And so I did that my whole life to try, because my lack of belonging has been the biggest heartbreak of my life. And I have longed to belong somewhere or to someone, or have a culture or a people claim me as their own. And no one ever has. And also my Irish mother and my Pakistani stepfather, right? They're who I came home to. And I'm not white like my Irish mother is with green eyes, and I've never been mistaken for a white person, and I'm not as dark as my Pakistani father, and also I'm Egyptian, so I don't look like my Pakistani. We don't have the same features. So when you come home constantly, like even if you are of color, you generally come home from a world that is quite difficult to navigate. A white world is quite difficult to navigate. You come home to people who look like you. I was always coming home to people who didn't look like me, and that's a really disconcerting place to be in. And so this lack of belonging, I felt, has led me to very bad choices in life. But I've really yearned for it, and I've really longed for it. And it's been like one of the greatest sadnesses of my life, not belonging to anyone. And then the realization that I had was that they were never going to give it to me, and I would have to claim it for my own. And that if I was going to say, I'm Irish, then I don't have to justify it to anyone, and I will be as Irish as I like. If I want to be African, then I'm going to be as African as I like. And on some days I feel more African than I feel Irish, and on other days I feel more Pakistani than I feel Irish, right? And it ebbs and it flows. But what I realized is identity is this ever-evolving thing, and it's always going to move and change and develop, and that's fine. You should just let it develop where it wants to, but no one will give it to you, and you have to reach out with both hands and take it for yourself. And if anyone ever tries to say you're not Scottish, tell them to fuck off. And if anyone tries to say, that you're not Arab, you tell them to fuck off. It is yours for the taking, and nobody else's. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. I didn't mean that to go on for so long, but I really am.
Thank you so much. What a brilliant answer. Yes, go for it.
Hi, Salma. So 2 things. I think one is just to really acknowledge the courage it takes to have these kinds of conversations. You don't have these very honest conversations without any kind of backlash. I follow you, so I see some of the horrible things that people can potentially say. But I think these are supremely important conversations to have. I think where culture meets faith, there's a lot we don't talk about, but then the truth is people actually experience these things. And when they do, they have nowhere to turn to. So you have a lot of people experiencing all of the things you've very beautifully described, but they've got nowhere to go. So I think thank you so much for just putting the fish on the table, because I think I can think of a few places where I'm going to just send this and sort of say, discuss, kind of let's have a conversation, because these are really important conversations to have. I am a woman of faith as well. I really, and I, like you, I really feel connected to the higher person. But I think that those of us who follow in the name, follow the faith in the name of higher person, have to have some really honest conversations. This is not the 17th century. Life has moved on. People are dealing with different challenges. So how do we really bring those into the conversations today, so that people don't feel like they're on the outside, so that they feel that there's space for them, there's places of faith, and where we're talking about the things that are really happening, but no one talks about. And I think the second thing I wanted to say was just in the space of female friendships, yes. I think it's really beautiful, because I think the other thing that happens where faith is concerned is the relationships we talk about the most often are the husband and wife. Yeah. And no one really talks about the joy of great girlfriends. And I'm blessed with great girlfriends, and they're conversations I've had with them that I haven't had in the place of my faith. So I think it's really important for us to really, again, just start to have these conversations about what is a great girl friendship. What does that look like? Because to your point, these are the spaces, these are the people that will be there when everyone else is gone. And how much do we call out, sort of saying, beyond the marital relationships, there are other important relationships like female friendships that we need to sort of speak on a bit more, that we need to continue beyond the moment we get married, because I think what often happens is people kind of get married, leave their girlfriends, and then when they run into trouble further down the line, they're looking for the girlfriends that they left 15 years behind. So how do we sustain and put energy and investment and time into these relationships so that we carry these people along the journey to create the kind of beautiful stories that you're writing about?
Question.
I think you're dead on. It's so important because I think probably people have all experienced that girlfriend that fell by the wayside and didn't stop putting in the effort, and then 10 years later say, "Bitch, where have you been?" I really empathise with that. I think, and I really feel really radically about this. I think we should treat our friendships with our girlfriends the same way we treat romantic relationships. We need to bring romanticism to our girlfriends. And I remember a couple of weeks ago, I went out for dinner with one of my girlfriends, and then on the way home, I was speaking to another friend, and she said, "Well, what have you done tonight?" I said, "Oh, I went out with my friend Maya." And she said, "Oh, you two really date each other." And I thought, that's such a lovely observation, and you're so right, we do. I send her flowers if she's having a hard time, and I send notes to her, and I send her little love messages or love WhatsApps when I know she's going through it, and even when she's not going through it. And I'm like that with all of my girlfriends. Like my core girlfriends, I will date the shit out of you, right? I will make time for you. I'm not going to see, I've had girlfriends who are like, "Oh, my husband's out of town, so should we do something?" Like, how about we do something when your man is in town and you leave your man and prioritize me, right? And stuff like that I hate. And so I will always prioritize my female friendships. And I really do put a lot of romanticism into that. And I think about the ways that we are, and you know what? When you have started to like a guy, if you are unfortunate enough to be straight, when you have started to like a guy, the beginning, we will do gymnastic routines for this man. We're going on a date, so we're going to make sure our roots are done in the hairdresser, and that we've got a wax, and that, maybe there's a new outfit or a new pair of shoes, and you know what? There might even be some new bedding, because who knows where the night might go, and you don't want to have like bad bedding, you want everything to be beautiful. And we do these gymnastic routines with men who are just so unworthy of it. And then I think about our girlfriends, and I think, why don't we put some of the same energy that we put into our dating lives when we're doing these routines to try and be this like most appealing, most appeasing, wonderful partner to the person opposite us? Why don't we try that with our girlfriends? Why don't we be the best versions of ourselves for them? And so I romanticism is my answer to that question. Let's bring the romance to our girlfriends. Let's go on trips away with our girlfriends. Let's prioritize them. Send them love notes. Send them flowers. Send them gifts just because. Make them a gift just because. Send them a letter in the post just to be old-fashioned and gorgeous about it. Speak their love language. Show up the way they need you. That's my biggest thing, is let's bring the romance to the women.
Amazing. I'm loving seeing the female friendships in the room, all hugging each other.
Yeah, we do that.
Especially our favourites at the front. Yes, we'll get. And then put your hand up really high if you've got a question. And then I think Sava will end with you. Yes, unless there's anything online. If there are, just kind of wave at me.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. I loved all the cultural identity stuff, and I'm a very proud British Pakistani woman, so I relate to all the Desi stuff, and you mentioned that. I think what I wanted to ask you is two things very quickly, just to touch on. I love the fact you talk about sex. I talk about, I'm going through menopause, and I talk about it openly with my family, my brother, my nephews, and I will talk to like any length about it. And I'm really open with anyone and everyone about menopause, periods. I'm not afraid to say penis or vagina. It's normal to me, and I think we need to normalise those things. But the one thing I wanted to ask you, which I haven't read the book, I'm going to be honest. But
you guys are killing me.
I'm so sorry. But when you talked about cultural identities, and I know you talked a lot about sort of heterosexual relationships, I wondered, because in Egypt, I know the LGBT plus community is quite a kind of controversial subject. If you had any thoughts about that when it comes to like Muslim LGBT people So it's a bit of a left-wing question.
Not left-wing at all.
This is uncomfortable conversation, so
No.
that's what we're here for.
I would say read the book.
I promise I will.
Only because there is something on that touches on that.
Fantastic.
Jenna is a very fluid individual
Right,
who seeks pleasure everywhere without ever labeling herself or without ever being constrained by where her pleasure takes her, right? And that's true of so many people, and I think it should be talked about more, which is why I wanted to put it in the book as well. And yeah, you know what? I've got loads of friends who are queer. I've got friends who are queer in Egypt, and one of them who's very close to me is kind of like my little sister. Is at the minute just figuring out that queerness and where she sits in that. And she's been talking to me lots about it. And when you say it's difficult in Egypt, it's impossible in Egypt because it's illegal, right? It doesn't exist. If you were to ask Egyptian person about the LGBTQ, like I remember when I first moved to Egypt, I said to my cousin, "Is there a gay scene here?" Right? And
Where's the gay bar at? Yeah.
Where's the gay bar? And I say that for reasons unbeknown to me, is the majority of my friends are gay. And so my first clubbing experience in Newcastle was in the Pink Triangle, which is what we called it, which is the scene in Newcastle. And can I just say also, gay clubs are so much better than straight clubs.
Especially for straight women.
Well, exactly. You don't have anyone trying to grope you and like lots of toxic masculinity about. But I remember saying to my cousin, I said, "Where's the scene in Cairo? Like, what part of Cairo is it at?" And he laughed at me and he said, "Salma, there's no gay people in Egypt." And he knows there is. The gay people don't exist here. There's none. So it's impossible and it is illegal. And I have got many Muslim friends who are queer and who identify as queer. I'm really close. I don't know if you follow Blair Amani online, who is an American Muslim bisexual woman, and she talks about it a lot. And my thoughts are on it the same way that you are talking about menopause, is that let's just keep talking about it and let's always be very open about it because they exist within our communities of faith, right? And they should, and they are, I am very impatient with communities of faith. I'm very impatient with my own religion for not being more compassionate and not being better. And the Muslims have not always been nice to the LGBTQ plus community. And I became a celebrant, and I went and I flew to Australia and I married my two friends who had waited until Australia had passed the right for equal marriage law. And these two women had campaigned and waited to get married until that law was passed. And we were jokingly, at one point, joking about I should come and be the celebrant. And then they asked me genuinely to do it. And I said, we should, because actually our allyship needs to be more visible and our allyship needs to be loud. It can't just go down quietly in the DMs, like, oh, that's really good that you're doing that, but never be vocal about it. And so I became a celebrant. I went to Australia, I married them, and then I wrote an article about it in Stylist because I wanted to be loud about it. I didn't want to just do this thing because actually the Muslims haven't been good to the LGBTQ plus community. The Australians haven't been good to the Muslims or people of colour. And so between all of us, between the three of us, we thought, let's do this really loud, visible thing where we can be really open about how we can all live quite beautifully side by side. So I'm exactly the same as you. Let's keep having those conversations. Let's bring them out of the shadows and into the light. And let's be really open in our allyship. You agreeing with me quietly is no good. I need you to agree quite loudly. It seems we're all going to the roof afterwards.
Well, on that note, if there are no more questions, then we'll end things for this evening. Can we please give Salma a huge round of applause? I believe the bar is on the 3rd floor and the restaurant is on the 5th floor. Go where you feel what you need is.
And my books are at the back.
And the books are at the back.
You know who I'm looking at.
If it's okay, I'm sure you'll sign a couple of copies for people. Absolutely. And it's been a real thrill to have you here this evening. Thank you so much to the Conduit.
Thank you all.
And thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Have a fabulous evening.